Welcome to Parenting Your Traumatized Child. I am so excited to be spending this next little while with you to talk about the effects of trauma on children and the way that as parents we can help support them and give you lots of ideas and strategies as you're on your permanency journey. Our time today, we're going to spend a little bit of time understanding who I am and why I think I can stand here and talk to you. Then look at what trauma is. Then we're going to look at what does trauma have to do with adoption, and especially with young children like newborns or infants. Does it really have anything to do with them? We're going to look at how trauma impacts or affects children. And then we're going to look at what does this mean about our parenting and what do we need to do for our parenting when we're talking about parenting children who have trauma in their background. We're going to end off with some ideas and strategies that you can think about as you're in your waiting stage in this permanency journey, and things that you can think about or that you can learn about as you keep going. First of all, let's talk a little bit about who I am. My name's Karen Moore, and I'm a registered social worker, and I've been doing this work for about 25 years, working with children, youth, and families. I'm also a trainer with the Adoption Council of Ontario, and maybe most importantly, I'm the mother to 4 children, and our family was formed through adoption. So many of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today, I know from a professional experience, and I also know from a personal experience walking through and walking the path of parenting 4 children who joined our family through permanency. So, let's start with what is trauma. Trauma sounds like a big word, and oftentimes in society when we hear it, we think of things that are extremely difficult and things that may be traumatic. That's where the word comes from. When we're talking about it from an adoption perspective or a permanency perspective, we need to have a little bit of a different flavor. According to the APA, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, and that longer-term reactions can include unpredictable emotions, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms. So, if we think about that definition, what are we talking about when we're talking about an adoption and trauma? How can adoption be a terrible event? What we need to remember is that the journey of adoption is started from a place of loss. Children become available for adoption because they are not able to stay in their birth family in the way that we may have expected them to. It doesn't mean that they don't have access to their birth family. It doesn't mean that their birth family may not be involved in their lives. It does mean, though, that somebody else is going to be taking on the day-to-day parenting, becoming parents of a child available for adoption. That means that child has experienced loss. What that means is that they are living through the reality of a loss of their primary caregiver, their birth parents, through many developmental stages in their lives. And we'll talk about that in some more detail in a little bit. What it means also is that loss has an impact each developmental stage that kids go through. And we need to be recognizing that, and we need to be ready in our parenting to think about what do I need to think about as my child goes through this next developmental stage that may have something to do with the loss or the permanency journey. The other piece we need to think about is that trauma impacts or can impact future relationships. Children can experience the fact that they have lost their first parents, and so they may worry about the impact of future relationships. Am I going to lose my adoptive parents? Am I going to lose other people who are important to me? They have had to learn early in life that loss can happen, maybe even before they're developmentally ready to understand it. The other thing that trauma can do is sometimes give kids the message that there must be something wrong with them. And you think, how is that possible? The reality is, kids are very egocentric. That means they think that the world revolves around them, and what happens in their world is their responsibility. And so if, for whatever reason, their birth parents aren't able or choose not to parent them, they can sometimes believe that it's their fault. and that can affect their sense of self, that can affect their sense of who they are in the world, and that can make them wonder, what's wrong with me? Especially if they're the only child in their classroom, for example, who's adopted, and they hear that none of their other peer group have that experience. Why was I not able to stay with my birth family when everybody else in my class was? So this is the implication or the reality of starting life from a place of loss, or starting the adoption from a place of loss. The other piece that we need to realize is that this happens no matter what age a child is at time of placement. So oftentimes we think, I adopted my child from the hospital. The child was brand new, newborn. You know that newborn smell? What that means is that sometimes we assume that they are not impacted by this trauma. Remember, it's the adoption journey that's traumatic because it's based in loss. So even if I am adopted at 12 hours old, I still am experiencing the loss of adoption. The other piece that we need to think about when it comes to trauma and children on a permanency journey is, depending on their life history, depending on their story, they may have experienced multiple or a few traumatic events. Whether that is in moving from foster home to foster home, whether that's prior to coming into care, experiencing abuse, whether that's physical abuse, emotional abuse, or sexual abuse. If it's an international adoption, the reality of what life was like prior to placement, whether that was in group care or in foster care. So we need to think about what experiences have our children had that may have given them a trauma experience. Remember, once again, it's about a reaction of loss and a reaction of something that's caused them difficulty. And when you think about the journey that some of our kids go through, they have multiple experiences of trauma that, as we begin to parent them, we need to think about those things and think about how they may impact our day-to-day and our ongoing interactions with our children. The other piece that we need to think about is that our children will need to incorporate into many of the facets of life that we know. So school, camps, activities, family events, family reunions, and sometimes those things have impact for them if they've had losses in their early life. So we need to think about the fact that even day-to-day experiences may be impacted when trauma is part of the journey. That means that there's a lot of work for us to do sometimes as parents, but believe it or not, with support, with education, and with resources, you're going to get really, really good at this. Take it from someone who knows. So the other thing that we need to think about is the impact on our parenting. One of the most important pieces of parenting a child who's experienced trauma is we need to first understand developmental norms for kids, because trauma can affect developmental growth for children. We won't necessarily know that unless we know what is expected of kids at different developmental stages. The other piece that we need to understand is that development for each stage grows upon the stage before and the stage before and the stage before. And so kids who've experienced trauma sometimes have a base of development that's not quite as secure as we may have wanted it to be. That can impact future developmental stages, so we need to be aware of what we should expect at those stages, so then we can look to see if there's any things we may want to keep our eye on and or access some professional support if it looks like something beyond what we can handle or that we know about. So for example, kids who may have come from a traumatic background, maybe they were with their birth families for a few years, there were lots of ebbs and flows and difficult situations, and then moving into foster care, it's not unusual for us to hear about kids who are 3, 4, 5 years old with delays in speech, with delays in self-care, so toileting, being able to look after themselves, or delays in social relationships. The reason for that is because they've had to spend lots of time working through their life experiences. They haven't had as much time to pick up those skills that we may have expected. So we have to be able to keep an eye on that, know what to look for, and be able to be comfortable in accessing the resources that can help our kids be the best they can be in all developmental stages. The other reason why we need to understand development is because kids who've experienced trauma or come from a traumatized background sometimes don't have equal or even development. So they may have advanced skills in their cognitive development, in their learning, in their ability to learn skills, and in their social development, as an example, they may have some delays. That can be really difficult to understand sometimes for the child and the parent. So being able to have context, being able to understand where a child should be within parameters, there's no such thing as normal, but having some idea of what to expect at each developmental stage will help you have a full picture of the child you have the privilege of parenting. It's that idea of understanding that with development, we have children who don't run before they know how to stand. They don't crawl before they know how to keep some level of balance or some idea of being safe in their environment. And so development comes with some expectations of I need to do this first, then I need to do this, then I need to do this. So as you're waiting and as you're preparing in your permanency journey, one of the things you can do for your benefit and for the benefit of the child you have the privilege of parenting is learn about child development. Not just at the age your child is at now, but from birth all the way up to adolescence. That will help you get a full picture as you continue on this journey with your child. The other reason why child development really matters is because one of the things that we need to do as parents with children who have an adoption journey, a permanency journey, and trauma is we have to learn how to decode their behaviors. What I mean by that is we have to learn to understand that they use their behavior to communicate. And oftentimes the message that they're trying to communicate is not quite as obvious as we may think it is. When we understand child development and when we understand the impact of trauma, it can help us decode or translate our child's behavior and help come up with strategies and interventions that will help the child feel safe and resolve the issue that they have. When we do that effectively, the behavior will go away. The other thing that we need to remember about decoding behavior is that children are absolutely amazing at using their behavior to get their message across. The difficulty is sometimes the adults in their lives are not so good at decoding that behavior to figure out what's going on. What we try to do sometimes is we try to consequence or punish behavior to try and stop it from happening. The difficulty is kids use behavior to express their needs, to express their feelings. If we try and stop the behavior before we understand the message the child is trying to give us, they'll get our message. And what they'll do is they may stop that behavior and they'll start a new one, because what they'll say is, okay, adult, I got it. You couldn't understand what I was saying to you when I was biting you, so now I'm going to start kicking you. Now you'll get it. So decoding behavior, understanding it, and then being able to meet the needs of the child will then be able to stop the behavior. Until then, you're just going to get a different kind of behavior. The other thing that we need to think about when parenting kids on a permanency journey who may have experienced trauma is that we need to use parenting strategies that will support their growth, that will support their ability to make amends, and that will build the relationship rather than punish. We want our parenting strategies to be within relationship because remember, our children start their journey when it comes to permanency from a place of loss. We want them to know that they are safe in their relationship with us to work through what they need to work through, make the mistakes they need to make, and that they are safe to experience that. We want them to know that we will help them make amends for something if they've made a mistake. We will help them learn from that, but we won't shame them into a place of feeling embarrassed about the learning that they've had. Children who come from a place of loss or trauma already feel a lot of shame. And so we want to make sure that our parenting strategies and interventions with them build relationship, build growth, and support them to learn from mistakes rather than feel shame and embarrassed about being the people that they are. A lot of mainstream parenting strategies may work for kids who don't have a trauma history. Some of those ideas are things like timeouts, those sorts of ideas. They don't work so well with kids who have a trauma history or kids who have experienced loss, because the premise of those parenting strategies is for the child to take some time away, think about what they've done, and then be able to come back and reintegrate. The problem for our kids often is they can't handle the disconnect from the people that they care about. It makes them too stressed. It makes them too scared. And so in your permanency journey, as you're preparing, one of the things you can do is look at and have conversations with people about parenting strategies that they use that will build children up, that will give them tools, give them opportunities to learn from mistakes, and give them opportunities to make amends for the mistakes that they've made at the same time in relationship with you, because that's where they're going to learn, it's where they're going to grow, and we know that that's where children heal. Children heal in families, and we want to give them a safe, loving, contained place to do that. One of the things I want to highlight here, and we're going to do a little bit of a summary, is that child development is a significant piece for you to learn about as you prepare. Spend time with kids. If you've got nieces and nephews, if you have opportunities to see kids, watch them, see how they learn, see what they do. The time to learn is now. When you have children placed with you, you're going to be experiencing it. So the time to learn and wonder and think about different ideas so that your toolbox is full of things that you can pull on, now's the time to fill the toolbox. It doesn't mean that experience isn't going to help you fill that toolbox, because believe me, it will. However, if you have a few tools in that toolbox before you start the journey with your child, you'll be able to pull on them if the one that you thought was going to work isn't working, if the 5 you thought were going to work aren't working. You've got a few more things in that toolbox to pull on and be able to kind of see, this may work here, this may not work here. Remember, your children are communicating their needs, their feelings, and their fears through their behaviors, and they will continue to do that until you translate it correctly. So sometimes you need to have multiple translators in that toolbox. You think the child is speaking German, they're speaking Russian. So you use a parenting strategy or an idea that's based in German, and you gotta look quickly for the tool in the toolbox that's actually based in Russian. The other thing that you really want to think about is exploring and learning about parenting strategies that are based in therapeutic parenting. We want our parenting to provide a place for kids to feel safe, to learn, and to grow. Our kids, like every other child on the planet, are going to make mistakes. Sometimes our kids make mistakes a few more times because sometimes it's takes a little bit of time for them to learn about these mistakes and to remember, oh yeah, the last time I did this, we talked about doing this instead. It may take them a few times to learn that, and so we need to have an opportunity in our relationship with our kids to be free and be willing to know they may not get it the first time. It doesn't mean you're not doing it well. It doesn't mean that you're not getting it. It means that sometimes things take a couple of times. They take a few times before we get the message, and that may be the thing that your child will need from you. Therapeutic parenting that's based in patience, that's based in love, and that's based in the understanding that possibly some of the trauma and loss is affecting their current behavior and their development. The other thing that we need to understand is that children start permanency through loss. So do we as parents. That means that our permanency journey, our adoption journey, our relationship with our child starts from a place of loss. Sometimes that can impact us as parents as well. We sometimes may struggle with the idea that our child's early life was not what we would have wanted for them, or the woulda, coulda, shouldas, if only. All of those statements of, if my child had only come to me at 2 months old rather than 6 years old, if only the foster placement wouldn't have broken down and they didn't have to go to the group home at 12, we could have had them when they were 10 years old rather than adopting them when they're 16. All of those things are things that we need to work through as parents, and we need to grieve. We need to understand it as part of our permanency journey, and we need to then heal from it so that we can move on in our partnership and in our wonderful relationship in parenting our kids. The other thing that I want you to think about, and this sounds really easy to do, and it's probably one of the hardest things for parents to do, myself included, is practice self-care. Parenting is a hard job. It's also the most wonderful, amazing job I have ever had the privilege to do. And it's exhausting sometimes. You need to take care of yourself. You need to look after yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. You need to be the best person you can be so that you can be the best parent you can be. We get our energy from parenting, from who we are as people. And often we look to putting our needs and our desires aside because there's always something to do. That can work in the short term. But after a while, if we get exhausted, we have very few resources to pull on to be the best parents we can for our kids, and our kids deserve the best parents they can have. That also includes if you're parenting or co-parenting in a couple, you need to also do self-care for the couple relationship. Parenting can help you see very, very clearly the things you did not realize you disagree with your partner about. And children often have the ability to be able to play one parent off each other if we're not good at staying as a united front. So being able to connect with your partner, being able to do the self-care in a partnership, once again gives you that energy to be a united parenting front that provides consistency, trust, and love, and those are the things that are going to matter and help kids heal and thrive in their permanency relationship with you. The only other thing I would say to you is, now is your time to get all of this information. Now is your time, before a child is part of your family, to learn, to think, and to grow. That toolbox is just waiting for you to fill it up. There's tons of ideas and resources out there, and it's up to you to be able to explore, wonder, think. And then once you've got a child who's placed with you and you have the journey of parenting with them, then you can start to personalize those ideas and tools for that child or those multiple children, because we haven't even started talking about parenting more than one child at a time. The tool that works with one may not work with the other. And so we need to have multiple opportunities in thinking. I'm going to leave you with the thought and the knowledge that we have been talking about a tough topic. We've been talking about kids who've started their journey with you through loss, and we've been talking about kids who've experienced trauma. I want you to also be left with the message that parenting is an absolute gift, and when we are able to provide an opportunity and an experience for our kids that provides love, support, and growth, we have no idea the things our kids are able to do. You've heard me reference the toolbox a lot through this presentation, and we've talked about many things that you're going to put in that toolbox: your knowledge of child development, hanging out with kids and getting used to how they interact and how they grow, doing that self-care we talked about, remember, self-care. The other piece that you can add to that toolbox is resources, books, articles, webinars, just like this. This webinar is part of your toolbox. At the end of this webinar, stay tuned for lots of links and resources to add to that toolbox that you're growing.